There was a rumor that the world was born in love. Before fire crowned the stars, before breath named the hours, a voice moved over the deep, and light remembered its name. In the wonder of creation, darkness loosened its grip. Waters fled their borders. Heaven unfolded its wings. From dust, a living soul was drawn. Mind to wonder, hands to tend, eyes to behold the face of God. But then another voice was heard, a whisper of doubt, a promise of more. Trust was traded for longing, glory for dust, and the garden closed its gates. Thorns learned our footsteps, sweat named our days, graves memorized our names. Yet mercy lingered in the ashes, and in the ruins a promise whispered, a seed foretold, a victory hidden in time. From tents and altars, from wells and wandering, from brothers divided and dreams betrayed, the story was carried forward. Generation to generation, the echo endured. Waiting, watching, calling. There was a rumor that the world was born in love, and one day redemption would walk among us. The word would breathe. The promise would live. And what began in a garden would rise again. Creation, fall, promise, redemption. Genesis was never only a beginning. It was the first song of salvation.
In 2007, I found myself at Toby Twin Cinemas, which I think they got 3 now, but watched a movie called Meet the Robinsons. And I remember watching this movie. I ended up loving the movie. In the end, there was this quote attributed to Walt Disney that said, "Around here, we don't look backwards very long. We keep moving forward, opening new doors and doing new things." I remember that quote and I loved it. What's interesting is where that mindset came from. You see, early in his career, Walt Disney started a small animation company in Kansas City called Laugh-O-Gram Studio, which I think was his first problem. And it failed. The company went bankrupt. Disney, he couldn't pay his employees. At one point, he was so broke that reportedly he was sleeping in the studio and living off of canned food. And eventually that company collapsed and he had to shut everything down. So he got on a train to Hollywood with about $40 in his pocket and an unfinished cartoon. And from that little step forward came Mickey Mouse and what would eventually become the Walt Disney Company. You see, sometimes that next chapter of our lives, it begins with a simple leaving what's familiar and taking a step toward an uncertain future. And that's exactly where we find Abraham in Genesis chapter 12. God says to him essentially, leave everything that's familiar and go to a land that I will show you. Genesis chapter 12, look down at verse 1. Let's notice what it says. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarah, his wife, and Lot, his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak at Morah. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "To your offspring I will give this land." So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the east and Ai on the west, Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward Negeb. If you're taking notes, the first thing I want you to notice is the promise. Notice the promise. In verses 1 through 3, we see this promise where God tells Abraham, he says, "I want you to go from your country. And when you go from this place, I will make you a great nation." But what you understand is this, is he's going to a place that not only does he not know it, he doesn't even know where it is. He doesn't even know where it is. God doesn't say, "Hey, here's the place you're going to go." He says, "Hey, listen, I want you to leave the place that you know, and I want you to go to a place that not only do you not know, I'm not yet going to tell you where and what this place is. But here's what I'm telling you, Abraham, is when you do this, I will make a great nation out of you, and I will protect you from anyone on the outside that does harm to you, and I will bless those that are good to you." You see, what we have to understand is God makes promises. He gives us promises. His word is full of promises. But those promises don't come with 5 and 10 and 15-year plans. They come with this idea of, listen, here's what I want you to do, and I'm going to give you just enough for the next step, and that's it. But do you trust me enough to take that step? And how we handle God's promises are always rooted in how much do we trust the one that gives the promise. My youngest nephew, when he was very small, he probably still does it now, if I'm honest with you. When he was very small, you could be doing literally anything. You could be building a nuclear bomb and be like, "I'm not sure what to do next." And he could be 4 years old and he'd be like, "Let me handle it. I know what to do." And you'd be like, "No, you don't know what to do." And this is what he'd say. He would say this, "Just trust me." And my response was always, I couldn't trust someone less than you. I don't trust you. I don't care what you say. I don't trust you enough to deliver on what you say. And so when we're talking about God's promises, it's going to be rooted in the idea of, do we know him well enough to trust him with those promises? And that's what Abraham has to do. He has to determine, God's told me to leave everything that I know and not only go to a place that I don't know, but literally go to a place that I don't yet know where it is. So we see the promise. The second thing I want you to notice is this. I want you to notice the trust. I want you to notice the trust. In verses 4 through 6, we see whether he trusts him or not. It starts right there in verse 4. I love what it starts with. So Abram went, as the Lord had told him. It picks up, it says, Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And he goes on down there. He took all his possessions they had gathered and the people that acquired Haran, and they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land of the place of Shechem to the oak of Morah. And at that time, the Canaanites were in the land. So he gives you this promise. Here's what I want you to do. And it starts off immediately, Abram went. And that's fascinating because when you study the book of Genesis and you read about the people that God was using on bookends around him, you see people that were constantly negotiating with God. They're like, I don't know. I don't know if I can do this, or I don't know if I can trust this, or are you sure you want me to do it? But not Abraham. But what you have to understand is Abraham had just as many excuses as everybody else did. It tells us that he was 75 years old. Abraham's like, God, I'm on the back nine, not the front nine. And you want to start a whole nation through me? I don't have any kids. And you want to send me? You want me to pick up everything and start a new life somewhere else? But he never says any of that. God said, here's what I want you to do. Here's what I'm going to do in and through you. And Abram just went. He just did it. You see, what we have to understand is we have to just trust him for the step that we're on. If he calls us to do something or promises, there's a promise that we lean on, we have to say, do I trust him enough to believe him? When you read through that section, you see that he sets foot in the land of Canaan, doesn't he? He's already there. He already sees God's promise. But what we have to also recognize is that last little phrase in verse 6, it says, but the Canaanites, what? Were already living there. He wasn't taking Abraham to an empty land or an empty house. He was taking Abraham into a land that at that time belonged to somebody else. And so even when he begins to set foot in the place that God told him to go, everything isn't neat and tidy. He's saying, do you see that the place I told you is real? Do you see that the place I told you to go to exists? Yes? Great. You've just taken the next step. But there's a whole lot more that we have got to do. The third thing I want you to notice is this. I want you to notice the confirmation. I want you to notice the confirmation. The beginning of verse 7, look at what it says. Then the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring I will give this land. If you look back in verse 1, it says that God spoke to Abraham. You look here in verse 7, it says God appeared to Abraham. What that tells us is this. What you hear from people often is they say, I just want to see God in my life. I want to see God move in my life. I want to see God work in my life. And the question we have to ask ourselves is, if we're not seeing God in our lives, we don't feel like God is showing up in our lives, are we taking the steps to trust him? Abram started with a word from God, but that grew into God appearing and God showing up. And when he shows up, he says, Abraham, you see this land that you set foot in? Do you see this place where you are? This land is going to be your offspring's. This is going to be your families forever. What it tells us is this. He's saying, Abraham, this is going to be your legacy. When you begin to talk to people about their lives, one of the things that they'll really share is that I want to leave a legacy. I want my life to outlive me. Well, if you want your life to outlive you, then it's going to be rooted in a life that trusts what God is doing, even if it doesn't make sense, even if it doesn't get all the way to the ending point. You have to understand, Abraham is never going to see his offspring fully take this land. He'll be gone well before that happens. But he was just the starting point of what was going to happen in and through his family lineage, his legacy. Here we are thousands of years later in Hernando, Mississippi, a place that didn't even exist at this time, talking about this man and his legacy. Why? Because he trusted God enough to take a step. He trusted God enough to believe him. And because of that, his life outlives him. And so it says, this land is going to be yours. Even though the Canaanites are here right now, it's not theirs. And whatever God calls us to, there may be someone or something already in that place or in that spot. There may be circumstances that are in the way. It doesn't matter. God says, this place right here, this is where you start. And you just keep walking forward. The fourth thing I want you to notice is this. I want you to notice the response. Notice the response. So we've seen this promise that, again, doesn't make sense. Like nothing about it. He's too old to do this. He doesn't have he doesn't have any children, doesn't have a son, no children. Starting over a new land. None of this makes sense for him. But he steps out, and where does he find himself? In the place that God told him he would end up. But there's still obstacles in the way because people are already in that land. But what we see from Abraham is this response. There in verse 7, look at what he does. He said he built an altar there to the Lord who had appeared to him. And from there he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel, and he pitched his tent. With Bethel on the east and Ai on Bethel on the west, I really want Bethel to be on the east. Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. He begins to do what? He worships before the land is his. So what does he do? Why did he do this? He worshiped because this was the place on this journey where he encountered God. You see, we've created this mentality that we worship once God does whatever in our minds he says he's going to do. But this appears that worship is rooted in the places where we encounter God. It's not based on the ending point, it's based on the meeting point. Where did I see God move? Where did I see God do something? Where did God show up? And so when Abraham encounters God and he meets with him in this place, what's he do? He builds this altar. Why? To remember. To remember. We are forgetful people. I remember when my kids were born and they would do things that were cute or adorable or whatever. And people would say, what? You better write it down because you're going to forget. And I would think to myself, there ain't no way in the world I'm going to forget this stuff. I stand before you today as a testimony to write it down. They were right. You're going to forget everything. Abraham knows this. He says, we're forgetful people. So in the place that he encountered God, he builds an altar to remember the place that he encountered God. You see, we've turned worship into an ending point thing. When God does whatever we think he's supposed to do, then we worship. Even more sadly, we've turned worship into music, which ain't it. I've been around long enough and grew up in this thing long enough to see churches blow sky high over styles of music, which is the goofiest thing in the world. Music was always intended to be the vehicle. And this is how this works, to think through this in your brain. When we sing songs like Christ be magnified, like what did we just sing? Christ be magnified. What our hearts and minds are supposed to do is to go back to the altars that we've built where we encountered God along the way. It's not to be like, I really like that song, or I really hate that song. Who cares? It's not about the song. It's about the altars. It's about the places where we've encountered him. And it's this beautiful vehicle that we as people, as we sing these songs, all of us together, our minds should be going back to the places where we encountered God, and we're singing together, remembering those moments. It's just a vehicle. If we were to stand up here and be like, all right, on the count of 3, everybody just starts saying the places you encountered God, it'd get real weird real fast. That feels like a cult, and I ain't interested in a cult. I've watched enough documentaries to know it don't go well. Instead, it's just for us in our hearts to sing these songs as a vehicle to remember the places where we built the altars, where we encountered God along the way. But remember, he didn't build the altar when the land was his. He built the altar where he met God along the way. We need to be those that in response, we see God move in our lives. We encounter God along the way. We see God do something, and we have a system or a way to remember it. We write it down. We put it somewhere where we can look back, that as we step out of faith, we remember the places where God showed up, the places where God worked. Because when we understand He's worked in the past, we'll trust Him to work in the present and in the future. And so after He builds His altar, what you see Him do is what? He just keeps moving. He's not even sure why. He's in the land, right? He's there. God's not telling Him to go remove them. He just keeps walking. He just keeps going into this land where God told Him to go. He's not even sure why or where. He just knows God showed up here, so I keep moving there. And when God shows up again, He'll tell me what's next. Our response needs to be built in. We step out. When we see God move, we see God work, when we encounter Him, we build an altar. And we remember the moment. And we just keep moving. Well, the last thing I want you to notice is this. I want you to notice the connection. And to do this, I want you to go to Ephesians chapter 2. Notice the connection. Ephesians chapter 2. What we see is, again, we read stories like Abraham's. And we say, oh, that's very interesting. Good for Abraham. That's great. How does that apply to me? How can I begin to see the parallels? Because what I want you to know and understand is the story and the life of Abraham is a parallel to our very lives just the same. And we make this connection here in Ephesians chapter 2. Look at what it says down in verse 8. Ephesians 2, verse 8. For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing. It is the gift of God, not a result of work, so that no one may boast, for we are His workmanship, created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand that we should walk in them. When you look at the story of Abraham, why did God choose Abraham? Was it because he had it all together? Was it because he was already this person of great faith? Was it because he was already this person that was doing something? No. He chose Abraham for one reason. Ready? By His grace. By His grace and His grace, He said, Abraham, you're the one. You're the one that I'm going to do this through. And here's my promise to you and with you by my grace. Every one of us, as Paul wrote here to the church in Ephesus, your journey and my journey with the God of the universe started with one thing, His grace. It was His grace. You're here today because of His grace. Any promise that He makes in you is His grace. Any promise you can hold to in His word is by His grace. Any story that He writes with your life is by His grace. Your journey and my journey started the exact same way that Abraham's did, by grace. Well, the second thing that we saw here in Ephesians 2, 8 through 10 is not only did it start with grace, it's lived by faith. How did Abraham live this life? It was by faith. When you read Hebrews chapter 11, it's affectionately called the Hall of Faith. We love nicknames. And when you read it, it's all about these people in Scripture that did X, Y, or Z by faith. By faith, so-and-so did this. By faith, so-and-so did that. By faith, this happened with so-and-so. And Abraham is mentioned in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. But I love how he's listed. In Hebrews 11, verse 8, you can go check it later. It says this: by faith, Abraham went, even though he didn't know where he was going. I don't know about you, but I identify with that. I feel like much of my life is I just go, and I'm not sure where I'm going or why I'm going, but I just go. Abraham, his act of faith was that he just went, even though he wasn't even sure where he was going. Why? How? By faith. God met him in grace, and he called him in faith. And because of that, Abraham just went. He just lived it. Works. The stuff he did with his life, he just did it. And he walked. He walked to Canaan. And he walked into the promised land, even though he wasn't sure where, why he was going, or when he was getting where he was going to get to. He just went. And I love the parallel where what God has shown, what we've seen in Abraham's story so far, is he said everything, he said, look, this land is yours, even though someone else already lives there. Even though someone else is already there, this will be the land of your offspring. This will be the place where they live. This will be the place where your legacy is lived out. You see, it was what? Beforehand, God had already set this in place. And if you look there in Ephesians 2, verse 10, what's it say? We're his workmanship created in Christ Jesus for good works, which God prepared beforehand. In your life and in my life, just like Abraham, God says, do you see this? This is what I have for you. And we say, but the Canaanites are already there. And he says, I know. It doesn't matter. We say, but listen, I'm too old, or I'm too young, or I'm too this, or I'm too that. And he says, stop. Before I ever met you in my grace, I had created this beforehand. And so if it's set beforehand, what he's telling us is this: how do we live out this faith? One step at a time. He gives us just enough to say, this is the step you're on today, and this is where I want you to go tomorrow. And we take that step, we just take the next one. And we just take the next one. And next thing you know, we're in Canaan. And we weren't even sure how we got there, why we were going there. And he says, you see where we are? This is it. And then we still see these obstacles. He says, I know. You just keep moving forward. I love that Walt Disney quote again, where it talks about, he says, we don't look back, what? For long. What do? Instead, we just keep moving forward. In our lives, as we see with Abraham, as we go, we build these altars where we saw God work, where we saw God do something, where we encountered God. And we look back just long enough to see the altars, to remember, to give us the encouragement, to give us the confidence to turn back around and do what? Just keep moving forward. You just keep going. And so as we go into just this time of response, everybody in here, we're in a different place. Maybe you're in a place you say, there's no way in the world that God could use me or do anything in and through me. You're right, except for one thing, His grace. The only reason God does anything in and through anybody is by His grace. So if you've received that grace in Christ, you're already there. He's just waiting on you to take the first step. Maybe some of you have forgotten that. You think, I've wandered, I've done it. His grace, by His grace. There's some of you in this room and you think, man, I can't remember any of the altars. I never built them. I encountered God and then I forgot God. My encouragement to you is to begin to ask God to do this one thing. Say, God, will you begin throughout the weeks ahead to bring to my heart and my mind the places where I've encountered you? And have a plan in place to say, whether it's a notebook or an app on your phone or something, that when those things come to your mind, you write them down. Why? We're forgetful people. We forget. So that when you find yourself discouraged, when you find yourself thinking there's no way I can take another step, you look back. We look back not for long, just long enough to remember. And that reminder gives us what we need, not for the next 5 steps, not for the next 10 steps, just for the next one. Some of you are here today and you're thinking, man, I've just kind of laid down. I quit somewhere along the way. I keep asking God for the 5-year plan and the next 15 steps. And the thing that you're just going to have to accept and understand, it ain't coming. The 5-year plan ain't there. The next 12 steps are not coming. What He will do, He'll give you just enough for the next one. And so maybe you need to ask yourself, what's the next step I need to take? It doesn't have to be something huge. It doesn't have to be something just enormous. It's just one step, one small step. And so maybe you can ask God, what is the one small step I need to take next? And then you just do it. And you trust Him. You may say, Austin, I don't even know where to start. I don't even know where to begin. That's fine. That's okay. My encouragement to you is begin to talk to somebody. I tell you this every time I'm up here. We're here every day. We got apple cider in there, which I'm having to slow down on. Long story short. We got coffee, whatever. And you just come sit around the table and you say, listen, people often say this. They say, I don't even know where to start. And my response is always just start. Just start talking. And we'll pick it up somewhere along the way. Come see us. Or maybe there's somebody else in your life. Just talk to them. If you notice, when Abraham left where he was from to go where God was sending him, he didn't go by himself. It was a whole group and crowd of people that went with him. We aren't designed to do this by ourselves. We need each other. And so you talk to somebody and say, you know what? I can't remember the altars. You say, I don't know what He wants me to do. I don't know what the next step is. And you begin to talk to people you can trust. And you say, help me walk through this and unpack this. And we do this together.